Good day, good day. Welcome to Drew's Book Reviews and Other Bookish Things. We're doing the Great Canadian Live Stream. It is Canada Day. Happy Canada Day, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure that you go and check out all the links below. I am joined here by some awesome Canadian fellow booktubers, Epic Talez and Sarah from Bright and Bookish. So their links and information is down below. So we're here to talk about some great Canadian authors because it's Canada Day. Happy Canada Day. So let's talk about that. But before we get into the Canadian authors discussion, this is really just kind of going to be, let's go with the flow, see how it goes, what may, not really fully structured necessarily. But let's start with Sarah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your channel and the viewers and where else to find you other than on BookTube, which is linked below in the Discords as well.
Sure, yeah. So my channel, Bright and Bookish, I talk mostly about fantasy, historical fiction, steampunk, a little bit of sci-fi. I like when it's not, contemporary settings. Pretty much if it's a contemporary setting, if there's no magic or weirdness, aliens or anything like that, I'm not going to read it. So that's kind of my taste in books. I do a lot of reviews and recommendation videos. I also have a Discord, so that's another great place to check me out. If you go to my channel, you'll be able to find links. I think they're all on my About page. I also do have like Instagram and Twitter and stuff, but I'm really not very good at the social media game, so mostly I'm just on YouTube. But yeah, so that's pretty much me.
Awesome. And Epic, tell us about your channel.
The name's Epic from Epic Tales, and yeah, I'm into everything epic in terms of storytelling. So I'm an avid book reader, fantasy more specifically. And if you want to get even more specific, my interests lie in grim dark and dark fantasy. Um, I love stories in every form they come. So whether it's we're talking from the writer's perspective, whether we're talking from like a book review, whether we're talking anime, manga, like TV shows, like I have all of that on my channel. I like to discuss about it, what I like about it, what I don't like about it. So yeah, check it out if you have time. Happy Canada Day to everyone. I love Canada so much. I came here for the first time in 2012, and so far, like I've grown into a man here in Canada, and I'm so grateful for like everything that Canada has provided for me, and I'm just really happy to be here to share the platform with Sarah and Drew. So yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun.
And speaking of Canadian authors, you're writing a book yourself. Tell us about it.
Cradle of Chaos. So that's the name of the book, and it's grimdark fantasy. And I've been writing it now for way too long because I keep getting inspired by a lot of books that I read, and so every time I read a book, especially when it's grimdark or dark fantasy, my ideas on how I want to represent my book develops. We're going to talk about Canadian authors, and two specifically today that have played a really large role in shaping the kind of writer I want to be. So one of them is R. Scott Baker, Prince of Nothing trilogy, if you haven't heard about it, and
No, I'm going to have to add
Michael
that on
Fletcher.
now.
Yes, you have to add that on. Like, such a great author, and I'm looking forward to speaking about him. But yeah, Cradle of Chaos is basically takes a lot of inspiration from history, colonial and slave histories more specifically, and yeah, kind of putting a spin on it. It's not historical fiction. It's as fantasy as it gets, but it's very dark, but it touches on a lot of philosophical ideas, and yeah, like I think it's gonna be. I think for people who like my kind of thing, I feel like it would be people would have a good time reading it.
Well, that's awesome. I think of the dark, as far as any Canadian authors that I've read, the darkest fantasy would have to be Malazan, Book of the Fallen. Actually, when I started reading Malazan, I didn't even realize that Stephen Erickson was Canadian until I Googled him up. It's like, oh, wait, he's Canadian? He's in Ontario? That's awesome. Because I think I've actually probably read more Canadian authors than I even realized because I honestly never pay attention to where they're from. Just, ooh, that looks interesting. But no, that's awesome that some of these authors have inspired you. And I'm actually noted down where you're talking R. Scott Baker. I got to look into that.
Wow. I feel like
Because
you would either absolutely love him, or like after you read his book, you just want to take a shower and just like, just like want to just clean yourself inside out, because it's a very he has very interesting ideas that he plays with.
oh, I love books that get into the deeper, darker philosophy of things. It's probably why I like a lot of dystopian. Now, the trouble I find with a lot of dystopian books is they all tend to be YA settings, and there's nothing wrong with YA, and like I do enjoy some YA, but I love a dystopia that's not YA. It's really not geared towards that, and I think that's why Margaret Atwood's *Handmaid's Tale* and the sequel, if you haven't read it, by the way, *The Testaments*, the sequel to that is pretty good as well. I actually couldn't find my initial copy of *Handmaid's Tale*. It's buried somewhere in the back of my bookcase, probably. But *Handmaid's Tale* is a very dystopian, grim look at a religious, tyrannical theocracy that controls people's lives, and it's really not a YA at all, which is part of why I like. And actually, I'd love to get into more dystopian books that aren't in a YA setting, because there's just it seems to be overwhelmingly YA for that. But like *Handmaid's Tale*, have you watched the show? And, have you read the book? Like what? How about you too?
I've read the book. I read it years and years and years ago. And for me, that's not, the darkness is not my cup of tea. Honestly, I think I'm the odd man out here. Is that I don't read a lot of grim dark. I don't read a lot of that really grim stuff. I do like a little bit more hope in what I'm reading, and a little bit more lightness. But I have read like the Malazan Book of the Fallen, which I think has lightness in it. I wouldn't call it grim dark, but it does have its dark moments for sure. But The Handmaid's Tale, it's a really interesting idea of like where we could end up as a society, which I think is really different than the YA stuff. Because when you read YA dystopian, oftentimes it doesn't like explain how they get there. How do you get to this dystopian? Like I think of like Hunger Games, for example. Like it's never
Yeah,
really explained why, or at least not in the books that I've read from the Hunger Games, why they're
yeah,
like that. Whereas I feel like with the Handmaid's Tale, it's almost too close to home, because there's a lot of that, like, here are the steps where, and it's kind of, throughout the
yeah.
book a little bit, and you kind of do have to piece it together. But definitely some scary stuff in that one. It does make me think of, it's not dystopian, but it's a post-apocalyptic story. The what is it called? Moon of the Crusted Snow by Wabakijig Rice, which is, he's an indigenous author from Ontario, and in that book, basically what happens is basically all of the like comforts of society, like electricity and satellite communication and all of that stuff disappears, and he kind of chronicles what happens on his reserve and sort of the way people behave when they don't have all of those things. So
So what?
definitely
What was
interesting
the name of
stuff.
that author again?
It's Wabakijig Rice. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't know how to spell that, unfortunately. I think it's probably like Wabgesig. Maybe I could be wrong on that spelling, but
I'm sure Google can help me.
Rice. Yeah, Rice is the last name, and the book is the Moon of the Crusted Snow, I believe. I read that last year, and I
Moon
don't
of
read
the
a lot of.
Crested Snow.
I've
Yeah, I
actually
don't.
wanted to read some more First Nations books, Canadian authors. There's actually a couple I got planned for September, because I have the whole Orange Shirt Day here in Canada. So for those who are not in Canada, Orange Shirt Day is about recognition and reconciliation of the residential schools history in Canada, and trying to recognize what was done to the First Nations community. And so I actually picked up some books that I plan on reading in September, which are First Nations authors who are they basically wrote what is a fictional story, but drawn from real life events from themselves personally or members of their family and their experiences in the residential schools. One of them is called Indian Horse, and I'm just drawing a blank on what the other one is. Five Little Indians, that was the other one. So I've got those on my reading for September, because that's the Orange Shirt Day month. And I thought that would be kind of a good way to kind of tribute and help learn more about the experiences that they had from those those times. So I would love to get into more First Nations. So I'm glad you brought that up, because now I know what to look for to try and find some additional writing, but from our First Nations community, which in Canada, like I'm sure there's got to be a lot of great writers in that community. Just unfortunately, sometimes certain groups don't get as much exposure as I think they otherwise should, for the skills and talent that they can contribute to our society, for sure.
Yeah, I was looking because I was trying to think of, which Indigenous authors I've read from. And most of the Indigenous authors I've read from, it's been nonfiction, to be honest, like that are Canadian, I should say, because a lot of the Indigenous authors I've read from that write fantasy or some of like those more, um, you know, genre fiction stuff, they're from tribes in the States. And so I know that for Indigenous people, the border doesn't necessarily mean as much
Yeah,
as for settler Canadians, because it's an artificial
yeah,
construct. It hasn't been there for
yeah.
very long at all, in terms of the history of this land. So there are a lot of great authors being published, but definitely not enough, especially in the fantasy realm. There's a few that are getting published, but yeah, it's great to find new ones for sure.
Oh, totally. And
So
sorry, go ahead, Epic.
no, there was just talking about like indigenous like literature, Canadian indigenous literature. When I was doing some study on prose, and there was a particular book that I got. I've been trying to Google it, but I can't find it. But it's indigenous poetry,
Mm.
and it's so beautifully written, and it's packed with a lot of wisdom and cultural. It has very cultural roots in the experiences and the ideas and traditions of indigenous society, and the poetry is so beautiful. It talks about a lot of it's writing that feels painful to read, but it's good because it makes you feel. So I will get, like, hopefully before the end of this live stream, I will get the name of that book. And yeah, if you're into poetry, I'd really recommend you read it.
Yeah, I don't read a lot of poetry, but some poetry I do like. I mean, I love Edgar Allan Poe's poetry, but I haven't gotten into a lot of poetry. But I would definitely be open to get learning more about some of that poetry that you mentioned there. Especially, I think First Nations culture can have, or Indigenous culture, they've got like a lot of really great stories within their cultural heritage and
Yeah.
ideas. And in a lot of ways, the First Nations community was a lot more progressive than everywhere else in a lot of ways. And I think has getting more of their literature into our reading repertoire can only be a good thing, in the long run. So I would definitely be interested in seeing more of that. If you do find it, send me a link so I could take a look at it. And maybe my local bookstore carries a book of their poetry. That would be awesome, and I'd love to check that out.
Yeah.
But
So,
I think, Sarah,
so
you mentioned. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Epic.
no, go ahead, sir.
So, you mentioned that a lot of the Indigenous writers are tend not to be fiction, but definitely I think there's a lot of really good Canadian authors as well that are nonfiction authors, or maybe they're both. You had mentioned earlier mentioned a lot of it has very dark overtone, and it's not really you like the lighter side a bit more. I don't know if you've read Steven Pinker's book Enlightenment Now. I just finished that. Now he is based in Boston, but he is Canadian. And the whole concept behind that, I've got a review coming up on my channel. That is, Steven Pinker really kind of frames it's like, look, we tend to have this bias where we look at the news media and we see all the terrible things going on and we think, oh my gosh, this world is in a terrible place and it's just getting worse. But he really kind of puts it in perspective. It's like, well, it's availability bias. We are only going to see the news when something bad is happening. So we really don't get the whole picture when actually things are getting much better than they ever have been in the history of the world. And so if you kind of like that brighter, more uplifting viewpoint, that is a book that I would definitely recommend, Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now. It really kind of puts it in perspective that, just as example, one of the things that he cites in that is like we see all this stuff about wars going on in the world and terrible things, but less people have died in war than since World War II than the total amount of people that died during World War II.
Hmm.
So it's just things are getting better, and I think that's really great to kind of see that positive perspective. Another book I actually have with me here as well, Chris Hadfield, Astronaut's Guide to Life. I mean, if you're Canadian, you know who Chris Hadfield is. If you're not Canadian and don't know who he is, he's the first Canadian commander of the International Space Station. This book is all about lessons learned from being an astronaut. He's actually got a science fiction book, The Apollo Murders, which is on my to be read list. So he's also getting into writing some fiction, but definitely another book with a very positive viewpoint about, hey, sweat the small stuff, but this is a good thing. This is what I've learned about being an astronaut, and this is what life has taught me. So that's another uplifting, positive, albeit not fiction, but another good positivity
So
coming your
I
way. Check them out.
I have I have like a kind of like, I would say it's twisted take, maybe not twisted take on like so grim dark and like positive bright setting. So how I look at it is, in a grim dark setting or in a dark fantasy setting like Malazan and other settings like that, the reason why the hope, right, feels like it matters is because it's so dark around it. I think about hope like something like light, you know. So if everything are if you're reading the book and the tone is very dark, and then you're giving like just like just a smither of hope, it feels like it matters more. So like, and I like that idea of hanging on to something, even if it might the Grimdark has a reputation of not paying off on that like hope or thing, but just like the feeling, like the journey of counting on that, you know. So it's so when you say hope, and like it's separated from the idea of like grimdark and dark fantasy. For me, it's kind of like, but in grimdark fantasy, I like the way it kind of it comes off, because in terms of how like hope is in actual reality, it's like there's never any guarantee that it will actually pay off, but the feeling of hope itself is a good one. So
No, that's a really
Um,
good point. I think I do see that, and like I've read all of the Malazan books, and so they definitely have very dark moments in those books, but you're
yes.
right, there is a lot of hope also, at least in my reading of those books. There feels like there's a lot of hope as well, but I think there's also something that Erickson does that is, yeah, I've got my copy here too. That Erickson does that is different than a lot of other grimdark authors, is that he has characters who are good guys. And I think a lot of grimdark that I've read doesn't have the good guy character, or like a character who's actually got good morals, that isn't just morally gray. Like I really love a character who is
that's
that,
good.
the indomitable good guy who's just like, I am going to do right, and that is what I'm going to do. And I also do enjoy having characters that are more morally gray. I think that's important too. But I don't like when the whole cast is morally gray and everyone is just going to do terrible things. Um, that's just my
Yeah,
preference.
totally. That's one thing I actually like about the Malazan. Now, I haven't been reviewing every book in the Malazan series. I've reviewed some of them. Honestly, it gets to a point in the series where I have a difficult time reviewing every individual book. So, like, well, what more can I really add without like spoiling the rest of the series before it? And so I'm like, it gets to a point where I'm like, I'm just going to finish the series and then just do a series as a whole review. But that's one of the things I do like about the Malazan book of the following is, yeah, like I said, it could be very, very dark, but it's got their good guys who are inherently good guys, and it's got their morally gray guys, and there is that hope as part of that, and also some of the characters, like they're just good people doing good things, but also very comic relief in a lot of the characters. Oh, I'm drawing a blank. There's that one girl. She was basically a zombie living on the street. I can't remember what her name was, but I found her character hilarious. Just the way just the concept behind her character, a dead zombie living on the street, which I found absolutely hilarious. That concept in and of itself. Or, oh geez, and of course I'm drawing a blank now when I'm thinking about it. There's that guy that basically lived on the roof. What was
See,
his
I
name?
haven't read, so I've read book 1 and 2 last year. I started to reread. I read these when they came out, so like 10 years ago. So specific characters, if they're not like the big main characters, I'm not going to remember names and things because I am working my way through these again. But I do, it's one of those things when you read a book and it's been a long time since you read it, you remember the broad strokes, but not the details.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
yeah.
when I'm done, I've got two left in the series. When I'm done the series as a whole, I'm gonna go back and I'm going to reread it with Audible, kind of do that immersive reading as they call it. I'm gonna see if I could find a graphic novel edition on Audible because I'm loving the graphic novel format. I'm actually rereading Lightbringer. Brent Week's not Canadian, but I'm rereading the Lightbringer series on graphic audio, and I'm absolutely loving it. So I'd love to get Malazan in graphic audio. I think that would just be amazing. So I'm hoping there's a
Yeah, I
graphic
wonder
audio.
I wonder if that exists. I've never heard anyone mention that, so I'm not sure if it does exist, but that'd
Well,
be cool if it did.
if it's there,
Yeah.
I'll get it with my credits. If it's not, I'll just get the home. But
Yeah.
you
I
You
read I
know, you
read
know.
sorry, go ahead,
Yeah,
Epic.
go. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say I reread Gardens of the Moon twice last year. I read this book twice because I really wanted to like analyze it, and I was gonna do some content on my channel, but then I decided against it because I didn't want to get started on it because I'm reading through it so slowly again. Because like this year I'll
yeah,
probably read another two, and it'll probably take me 5 years to read the whole series again. So, but
probably yeah.
this is Gardens of the Moon is the one that's in my mind the most, but Dead House Gates is the other one I read last year. So,
Oh,
um,
Dead House Case. I think I remember the thumbnail I did find there was the Ship of the Dead where the heads were on the deck and the bodies down below. I love that. I think my thumbnail I've separated my head on the thumbnail had like the head just sitting on the deck and me just over here headless. I remember doing a review on that one. That was a fun thumb. By the way, you could do amazing things with the green suit and the green screen, and it could be a lot of fun. Which
Yeah.
definitely, if you have one, great, go for it. If you don't, that's okay too. But it could be a lot of fun for sure.
Something that makes the Erickson book so interesting to read, from if you're analyzing it from a writer's perspective, is the fact that he doesn't do a lot of exposition. So a lot of the work you're kind of co-creating it with him. Like you're helping him build a world in your head, and it's always very interesting to see the discussions surrounding the discussions around the books. You have people arguing about what was actually happening at different points, and you see people really like stamping down on how they imagined it, and it's very interesting because everyone imagines it a little bit different. And I feel like that is because he doesn't Erickson doesn't hold your hand while you're reading the book. He doesn't hold your I think and I was watching an interview of his where he said that was actually intentional. So it's Malazan, from a writing perspective, was kind of like a very experimental book. Experimental in the sense that it was very intentionally written with as little exposition as possible. So I find it really, really impressive that you read it twice in 1 year, because I've been having problems getting through it even once. And talking, okay, go ahead.
I'm 10 books in and I'm still not clear on this whole warm stuff. Honestly, I'm convinced Malazan is one of those series that you're not really going to understand it till you've read it at least twice. Like I said, I'm 10 books in, and they're in this place doing this thing, and then suddenly and they left the war, and I'm like, wait, they're in a war in this whole time.
I love the Warrens. I think the Warrens are such a cool concept, and people have so much trouble with it because he doesn't explain it. And that's another thing. Erickson, there's a lot of stuff he doesn't explain, and like I really enjoy Steven Erickson's writing. I think that the like fan base can be a bit intense about his stuff, and like you can't say anything negative about him without being attacked on the internet. But I do really think his stuff is really great, and I'm really proud that he is originally from Winnipeg, or at least he spent his formative years here because he actually graduated from high school in Winnipeg. And so I get to kind of
Right.
claim him as a Winnipegger, even though I think he lives in England now or something. But
I thought it was Toronto. And then I
well,
heard a
him
rumor
and
about writing a book in a coffee shop in Vancouver at one point.
so Steven Erickson and Guy Gavriel Kay both went to the same high school. My camera, I can't figure out where my camera is. Sorry. Guy Gavriel Kay is another Canadian author who we haven't talked about yet, who writes crazy good fantasy, very different than Erickson, but he also went to the same high school as Steven Erickson in Winnipeg. And they were a couple of years apart, I think. I don't think they were, contemporaries, but I think it was like, Guy Gavriel Kay graduated, and then Stephen Erickson went to that high school. But and then I think Ian C. Esselmont, I don't think he's from Winnipeg, but he writes the companion novels also in the Malazan world. And I thought I had one of his books here, but I can't. Oh, here it is. He is Canadian, but I don't think he's from Winnipeg. I could be wrong on that, though. He might be the one from Toronto. I didn't look it up.
No.
Speaking about a writer from Toronto, I believe even Winters is from Toronto, right?
Evan Winters, yes, actually
Yes,
have
from Toronto. And
Rage of Dragons. I'm finally getting to it this month on my TBR.
I am so like he's a writer that inspires me so much because not only is he Canadian, like his books are based on like an African caste system, which I think is very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. And he inspires me because like he's the writer I have the most in common with when it comes to like background because I grew up in Africa as well. So I'm really, really, really into like Evan Winters, like, and yeah, I haven't finished reading like Rage of Dragons, but I love him already, and I want to see what he has to offer, what he brings to the table.
Well, honestly, I was reading an interview by Evan Winter, and one thing that I read in that interview, and I wish I could remember where, because I'd love to link it, but I can't even remember where I read this. It was probably just in my feed somewhere or something. But he said he wrote Rage of Dragons because he loves fantasy books, like he loves that, but he felt he struggled to find a fantasy book with people, as he said, that looked like him, and there just wasn't any. And he wanted something for his kid to say where the characters were like them. They weren't the typical white characters that we see in fantasy, but people from African heritage that we just don't see a lot in the fantasy world and the things that are and the books that are published. And he really wanted that for him and his family. And so he went and he wrote Rage of Dragons for people like him. And that really stuck with me. I'm like, why? I never even thought about that. I've been reading fantasy for years, and it just never occurred to me that there was really that lack of diversity within the fantasy realm. I mean, we see all these awesome fantasy races, but the people are always, that European white group of people in fantasy. And there really has been a lack of diversity in that. And more, we're starting to see more of that. Rage of Dragons is an example of that. I know there's some Poppy Wars from east, far east setting and people and things like that. So it's really good. We're seeing more of that. And first I heard about Rage of Dragons, then I kind of looked it up and read a bit on that. And when I read that, I'm like, wow, this has got to be something. This is going to be interesting, because finally something different, something that isn't your typical fantasy. And so I had to buy it at that point, and that's really what got me to definitely go for it.
Well, and it was
The
originally
fantasy.
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
Evan.
go ahead. Go ahead.
No,
Go
you
right
go.
ahead.
You go. I've talked a lot. You go.
No, like the fantasy scene in Africa is growing so much. Like the interest is rising so much, and there are a lot of writers from Africa that are now writing fantasy. Even Winters stands out for me because he's one of the more popular ones, and it's incredible to see how successful Rage of Dragons has been. And a lot of people, when I watch their reviews of Rage of Dragons, they talk about how experiencing that different setting that is based on an African caste system is very intriguing. Like adds an extra layer of wow. Like this world building is really really interesting. So I can't wait to dive into it. And the only reason I haven't read it yet is because I feel like it's something I would want to dissect, like really take my time dissecting. But yeah, like even Winter is, I haven't even read him yet, but I already hold him on very high regards.
Well, let's buddy read it this month, Epic. It's on my DVR.
I'll be down to buddy read with you next month because this month I'm doing the readathon thing.
The India Accords. I was just going to say, wasn't
The
it
India
originally
Accords.
self-published? Wasn't Evan Winter's book Rage of Dragons originally self-published and then it got picked up? Am I?
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Okay.
I heard
So
that
then
it
you
was
could
originally.
read it, Epic. You could read it for Indie Accords. It was originally self-published.
Nice. Look at wow. Just look at that. Just look at and this is what I was saying. I think before the live stream started, the one of the advantages of reading indie books is that you get to see something. You're offering yourself an opportunity to experience something different than what like what publishing companies have said. This is good, this we approve of this. So it's super interesting. It picked up in orbit by 2019. By the way, CD 287, you should check out Brandon's channel. He has an amazing book review for Rage of Dragons. So if you want to kind of get an idea of what it's about, check out Brandon's channel, like Awesome BookTuber. He's also a writer. His book is I can't wait to read his book as well.
Yeah, support your fellow booktube writers. I've always thought about writing a book one day, but I'm just too lazy to get around to it.
I've started planning because I'm going to try and do NaNoWriMo this November and write a book in a month. I haven't done that in years and years and years. I think the last time I actually participated in NaNoWriMo was probably like 2017, 2018 maybe, and I only managed 30,000 words, which was not a full book. That's a novella. But I want to try and get back on that for this November.
Yeah, I always have these ideas in my head about good magic systems and fantasy worlds, but I always struggle to put together a plot and a story. I'm like, no, that sounds too much like this or too much like that. And I would want something totally original, but I guess that's almost impossible these days. I honestly believe you can't write an original story. You can only take an original take on a already existing idea. Because I think at this point in history, every type of story has already been told. It's just a matter of how well do you do it, and what's your unique take or view on that type of story. And you can have a really good story with a really bad writing and it could be a terrible book. You can have a really dumb story, but with really good writing and it makes it a fantastic book. Right?
So you mentioned something about good magic systems. And yeah, I'm going to try and sell this very, very grim, dark book. It's like, if you read that book, it's so dark. And I'm going to try and sell it to you. It's by a Canadian author, Michael Fletcher. The magic system in that book is, I can only breathe. Like,
is that the Blackstone Heart?
No, not Blackstone Heart. Beyond Redemption. I haven't read Blackstone Heart yet, but I think he just completed the trilogy. The third book just came out like last month. I'm going to buy all three and I'm going to read it, and I'm probably just going to like binge through it, because if his writing is anything consistent to what he did in Beyond Redemption, which I believe was his first book and is also self-pubbed, then I can see Michael Fletcher being one of my favorite writers. Magic System is so interesting because he mixes very dark psychology. People, the Magic System, you would really like this. You would really like them. I would say at least the magic, at least the magic system. And I would say you are right to be scared to read Fletcher CD 287, because the book is so dark. And while it doesn't have a really good character, there's one character in particular who always wants to do what's right, but the world he lives in wouldn't let him. So if you appreciate the intentions of a very great character to be good, if that is something that you can acknowledge and just go with, then you might really like that character. But the characters are very colorful. It's very psychological. It's based on the magic system is based on mental illness. And it's, of course, a grim dark book. So the more mentally ill you are, the more powerful you are.
Right. I could get behind that. That sounds cool.
You had me at dark psychology.
It is so cool. Sorry?
You had me at dark psychology.
It is so cool. And I feel like Michael Fletcher is probably one of the... I feel like people are going to be talking about him long after he's gone. Like I feel like because his books are relentlessly what they are. Like he doesn't hold back in his imagination and the way he expresses it. So I highly recommend Beyond Redemption, but it is not for everyone. If you read the first 3 chapters and you don't like it, just drop it and yeah, let me know and I'll send you an official apology. But the book is a really good one. It's a really
I'm
good
willing
one.
to try anything. Like I have heard lots of people talk if Blackstone Heart is also by the same author, is that the case?
Yes,
Yeah,
Okay,
Blackstone
Stone
because
Heart.
Hunter
I've
Yeah,
Scott actually.
I've heard a
So
lot of people talk about Blackstone Heart and seen a lot of reviews and stuff. I haven't heard of this other one. You said it was Beyond Redemption. That's what it's called.
Beyond Redemption. Yes,
Beyond Redemption. So I'll look into that and see and
it's
give the
it's
first three
it's
chapters a try.
it is disgusting. I tell you again, but the characters are so good and the magic system is one of the best.
you know, I seem to be one of those people that have a really difficult time DNFing a book, even if it's a book I'm hating. I don't know why, but I have like almost this OCD compulsion. I can't leave something unfinished. It's like, oh, this is horrible, but maybe, just maybe, the ending will be really good, and I'll never know if I don't finish this.
No, no,
You
for
know, and
me, if I'm reading a book, I have that same OCD problem of actually DNFing it, but I'll just be thinking of the rant review, and I'll be basically creating a rant review in my head as I'm reading it. So
no,
that
I will say,
abstraction
yeah,
from it is fun.
I will say this: I love when a book completely changes my perspective on what I'm thinking while I'm reading it. And I could actually say, I'll be talking a bit about that in my Blue Haven review. That
Hmm.
happened with this book. One of the characters in here, when they go to this resort, and I'm thinking, how the heck did this character, in their circumstances, manage to pull off being able to go and stay at this heaven on earth place? There's no way they could have reasonably afforded that, and there was no explanation as to how they managed to pull it off. And then the explanation that was thrown in partway through the book was almost like an afterthought. It's like, oh, well, this is how. It's like, well, that's just really dumb now, because it sounds like you're just putting that in there to try and, close a plot hole that was glaringly obvious, right? That's
Hmm.
how I was feeling when I was reading it. And I was kind of like, this is kind of dumb. But then as we progress through the book, suddenly everything changes and it reveals what is actually going on. And you're like, holy crap, that plot hole now makes perfect sense with how this is actually set up and how the book is going. And I'm trying to be very careful to be vague here because I don't want to spoil anything. But
Hmm.
I love how I completely turned that around while I was reading it and completely changed, like, okay, this actually makes sense now. It's not a plot hole anymore. And the what seemed like an afterthought explanation actually is very consistent with what's really happening at this heaven on earth. And I just thought that was just awesome the way that was done. And I really look forward to just kind of going nuts on the review on this because, like I said, I absolutely love it. And what one of the things that anytime I get a book from an author like this one, a free book, I always, if I really don't like it, and there have been a few that I thought this is a terrible book, I'll tell them up front. It's like, are you sure you want me to put a review on my channel on this, because I did not like it. But this is one of those ones that I absolutely love. So I love seeing that happen within a book. And I don't know about you two, but that is just, it's just so perfect when something like that happens, where a glaringly obvious plot hole that makes you feel like this is a really just lazy writing on that part actually turns out to be perfect with the book in the end.
Hmm.
It was just
That
awesome.
actually that made me think of this other book by a Canadian author that I wanted to talk about today. This is Hench by Natalie Zena. I think it's Walshots. It could be Walscots. I'm not sure how to pronounce that last name. This is, I guess you would call sci-fi, and it has a plot that like starts out one place and goes in a direction that you're not expecting. So it's not so much that there's plot holes, but just like the book that you get at the end is not what you thought you were going to get at the beginning. But basically, in this world, superheroes are real and like supervillains are real. So it's kind of like that TV show The Boys, if you've ever
Ooh, I
seen
was
that.
just about to
Yes.
ask if it
Yeah.
was like the boys.
Yeah, and what happens is the superheroes cause a lot of collateral damage, the same as like in The Boys, where like innocent people get caught in the crossfires. And our main character, Anna, she's a hench, which is like a job with a supervillain. She works, at first she's like doing typing for a supervillain, and she's like a temp, and she's just paid, minimum wage, and she gets injured when the superhero comes to take out the supervillain that she works for, and she becomes obsessed with bringing down the superheroes and with like exposing the fact that they're not good for
That's good.
society, that
Hmm.
superheroes actually aren't, helping, they're doing more harm than good. And it's a I thought it was a brilliant book. I don't read a ton of sci-fi. I don't really read a lot of like superhero stuff either, but I absolutely loved this last year. It's adult. Yes, it is very adult. There's lots of
Has to be
violence.
adults, yeah.
And the main character Anna, she is amazing in my view. She has a life altering injury that she becomes disabled because of her encounter with the superhero. So it's got really good disability representation. And it's a revenge story, which I love. It has she also uses like accounting and like Excel spreadsheets to prove that the superheroes are evil. So if you love like a weird twist on things, it's great. I
So
absolutely love
just
that
to be
book.
clear, the villains are
Yeah.
paying minimum wage and following the law. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, real,
I
Yeah,
like
real,
no,
that.
real evil.
exactly. Real evil. Yeah. I mean, it's a weird concept, but it works so well. And like I know that's that whole idea of like superheroes being bad. It's not a new one, right? Like not bad in the sense that evil, but like maybe not as good for society as you think. Like I mean, Pixar did that with The Incredibles, right? Like that was, or what was that movie with Will Smith? Um Hancock, which is like
Yeah,
Hancock.
super
Yeah.
old. Yeah,
yeah.
like so like this is not a new idea, but I really appreciated the way that it was done in this book, and I love the revenge story. I am all about a revenge story.
And
And
this is by a Canadian author, right?
yes, yeah,
Oh,
it was in
nice,
the
nice.
Canada Reads last year. In the like not one of the I don't think it was one of the finalists, but it was in the list because I always look at that. If you haven't, CBC does Canada Reads every year, and you can see a list of books that are all, notable books by Canadian authors. And another one that I don't have a physical copy of that was also through Canada Reads was The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk. Now, that one is more of like a fantasy of manners, with some romance in it. So maybe not the stuff that Drew, you and Epic are reading, but that one was really good too. It had a really strong feminist message. And C.L. Polk is, I think, from Calgary, and they have a new book coming out later this year that I'm really excited about. So Canada Reads is a good place to like learn about new authors.
That's awesome. There's one book
So
that.
fun
Oh,
fact about me, Sarah. I spent like when I was in high school, there were literally no books to read, and for like 2 3 years, I was only reading romance novels. So there's more to me than you might know.
Fun
oh,
fact.
I could totally see you reading a romance with a glass of wine on the beach as the sun sets.
Yes, with a
Um,
Balrog right behind me there, just looking.
yeah, exactly.
Hey,
There's
what's not
there's
romantic about the Balrog? Like, I think the Balrog is
I
plenty
know,
romantic.
right? I know, right? Like,
the Balrog's heart burns for you.
yes, he's just misunderstood, heartbroken,
Look,
dark.
Gandalf and the Balrog were really just they were good friends.
Lovers
Yes,
quarrel.
really good friends.
Exactly. There's one
It
book
was.
that
I thought it was very cute how they
yeah,
were like they were falling into the
yeah,
bottomless pit like in a tight embrace.
they were falling in love. That's what it was. Yeah. Life of Pi was written by a Canadian as well. I didn't find that out
Oh,
until
it
much later
was.
after I read it. Yeah, Jan Martel is actually Canadian. I found that out quite a bit after I read the book. I was like, wow, he's Canadian? Cool.
I looked for
So
my copy of that, but I lent it to somebody and they never gave it back, I think, because I love Life of Pi.
that's why I stopped lending books. I never got them back. I'd rather just buy
So,
them the book so I don't have to replace mine.
so we've spoken about Malazan and an Erickson a lot, but not a lot of people like talk about a very good friend of his who is also a great Canadian author, as far as I'm concerned, R. Scott Baker, the Prince of
Yes.
Nothing. R. Scott Baker, he does almost the opposite of what Erickson does in exposition, and he does it to a level where it it, as a matter of fact, it's excessive. And if you watch my book reviews, I'm always complaining about excessive exposition. I'm like, I don't like the curtains being described for like 3 paragraphs. I'm always complaining about excessive exposition that goes nowhere. But R. Scott Baker makes exposition interesting. Why? Because I do not know a lot of authors that can write prose as neatly and as beautifully as he does. His writing is next level. And once you get past the first hurdle of understanding how his prose is, it is so beautiful. Like it engages your imagination in a way that for me at least, like no other book really has. And he is someone that has really influenced my writing. I wrote a couple chapters of Cradle of Chaos, and I was feeling confident. I was like, oh, at this pace, I'll probably finish in a couple of months and everything. I had like a projection in my mind. I read R. Scott Baker. I went back and I started changing things because I'm like, nah, I must write like this guy now. His writing is so good, and the story itself is filled with philosophy. It's filled with a lot of things that so something else about R. Scott Baker is that I have a lot of things where if you read my book reviews, I'm very like, this is what I like, this is what I like, and this is what I don't like, this is what I don't like. R. Scott Baker broke at least 5 or 6 rules that I have in my head, and I even enjoyed the book more for it because he pulled it off so well. So he's made me look at my writing and what I enjoy while I'm reading very differently, and that he's that good of an author. So I highly recommend. Canadian author, man,
Oh,
really number
Have
one.
you're
have
making
you
me want
read?
to go buy him right now.
Yeah, I haven't read R. Scott Baker, but when you talk about Canadian authors that have beautiful prose, have you ever read Guy Gavriel Kay? Epic? Have you read from
No, I
him?
haven't. No.
So I've got a couple of his books here. He's an auto-buy author for me. His prose are like I think they're some of the best prose ever written. Now he writes historical fantasy, so he takes like a time period and then he turns it into a fantasy world. So like A Brightness Long Ago, this is the most recent one from him that I finished that I gave 5 stars, and this is set in like Renaissance Italy, except it's a fantasy world. And like his books break the same way that you were just talking about R. Scott Baker. His books break all of the rules of things that I like about books because I like complicated world building. I like fast paced plots. I like good guy characters. Like those are the kinds of things that I normally like, and that's not what his books are. His books are really slow. They're very meditative. They're very beautifully written, and it's just I give him 5 stars, and I don't know why. It's really interesting how an author can do that just with the quality of their prose.
Oh,
You might want to try
100%.
and check Guy Gavriel Kay out for his writing style.
Yeah, that is a
So
definitive yes on that. And
so
when they break the rules,
so CD 287. Have you read Prince of Nothing? Because something that makes Baker's prose so good is that not only is it doesn't come off as flowery, like it doesn't feel embellished. It's very efficient. Like sometimes he can make like a very short sentence that would change the way you look at an idea in like. And believe me when I say its strength is one of what makes Baker so good is like his knowledge of his depth of knowledge in philosophy, religion, and history. So I would recommend that you try. It's dark, but like it's dark, but it's so good. Like he said, not yet, but I have one of his books again, scared because I hear it's so dark. It's actually so dark. Yeah, I should have said that first. It's so dark. But yeah, if I'm recommending a book so strongly, you can just assume it's dark. But but that is
and
no reason for you not to try it.
nothing wrong with dark. Darkness in a book with hope, I think is part of what can make things so good, and that's something I love about it. And like both of you said, when they break the rules, but they do break the rules of the things you don't like, but it's done in such a way that it's just like, I don't normally like this, but wow, they did it so well. I love it. That is always an amazing thing in an author, and I absolutely love it when that happens as well. And I know I keep going on about Blue Haven because it's fresh in my mind, but Blue Haven did just that. Something that seemed like such a ridiculously obvious plot hole turned around into something that's so it works so effectively. I love when we see that in a book, and I love when we see that happen. And it's awesome that R. Scott Baker has done that, and that's making me want, as soon as we're done, just to go out to the bookstore and buy some of his books right now, because that is just awesome. And I'm really glad to hear that that worked out for you, and that recommendation. Yeah, I just might have to pick up R. Scott Baker next time. Maybe CD could remind me when I visit Edmonton when we're doing some book shopping to grab some.
I have a question about R. Scott Baker Epic, because I haven't read from him. In terms of the level of darkness, like I'm trying to think, probably the most like grim dark author that I've read is probably Joe Abercrombie. And I read his books, and like I thought they were fine. They didn't have enough plot for me. I need something to actually happen in a book for me to enjoy it, and there's just not enough of that in Abercrombie's books. Though I did like Best Served Cold is my favorite of his stuff that I've read because it is a revenge plot. But in terms of darkness, is like R. Scott Baker even darker? That's my sense, but
What's the name of the Abercrombie books again?
the
The First Law.
yeah.
The First Law is Rainbow and Unicorns. It's
Okay, yeah.
rainbows,
See,
unicorn, puppies, and kittens compared to
okay.
compared to R. Scott Baker. R. Scott, it's like I would rate the First Law and the First Law as an entry into grimdark. Like it's like, okay, you're trying to curious, is this something I might like? You read the First Law, and then right there. So,
I mean,
but
I read like all of the First Law books that were out at the time when I was reading them, which was a few years ago. So I think I read 3 or 4 Joe Abercrombie books. So it's not that I disliked him; it just wasn't necessarily my favorite thing in the world. So I don't know that I'll be able to read R. Scott Baker and enjoy it because it just might be too dark for me. But I'll give it a try. I'm willing to give anything a try, like I said.
you know something like it has its moments where that are really really dark, but when you're reading it's not. I feel like you won't be so focused on the dark. Like they won't be focused on the dark. Like it has moments that are very very dark, but it's how he plays. After he wrote Prince of Nothing, like people like on his like refer to him as a philosopher. It's how he's able to make you think about ideas that makes his book really good. Did I say makes his books really, okay? I thought I said makes his really books, but
They're really good books. Yeah.
really good books, yeah, really good books. So it's the way he makes you think, the philosophies, ideas, and how he and because remember I said he does a lot of exposition.
Mhm.
So he's talking about these ideas and he's expanding on them in exposition, and it's it really plays with the mind.
Yeah, Black Company CD is commenting here. That's another one I haven't read. So
I think I've heard of
It's
Black
great
Company,
to make it choice. Yeah.
but definitely.
is that Glenn Cook? No, I'm getting that wrong. Who wrote Black Company? Maybe CD can tell us in the comments.
I don't even for me that I like dark books and everything. I don't like dark books that the darkness is just being indulged. I don't like dark books where it's just like, oh, dark for the sake of darkness. It's not. I don't like books that the intention of write. I'm going to write a book that is dark. It should be an element that it should be an element that carries in the tone, not in its indulgence. If that makes sense.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%. I feel that way about a lot of different themes and settings. I don't want the setting to be the story. I want it to kind of be like the underlying tone and theme behind it.
Yes. Yes.
Have people in a terrible setting, but don't make the setting the story. The story is how do those people deal with the situations in which they're in, which is 100% part of that. Like I love a book that I also would love a book that challenges that has a group of people that is essentially forced to reevaluate their own sense and worldview to come to terms with reality and accept and open themselves up to what how their worldview and how they've engaged and how their culture has engaged with the world and how that's completely affected others. I love
think
that
So
type of story.
That's really
If
rare,
I'm
I think,
Yeah.
Drew.
Yeah, it
but
is.
you see, it's really rare. But I find that a lot in grim, dark, and dark fantasy, because you ask yourself constantly, what would I do if I was in this position? Because it's not just the characters aren't just dark because they are bad people. The world is messed up, and I feel like in the best cases of it, they are trying to survive, and they are trying to succeed. They're trying to, sometimes the goal, the target is good, is just like, how do we get there? And they are giving like two or three options, and then they make a decision, and then I can pause when they make a decision that is messed up, and ask myself, if I was in that exact position, what would I do? Like, that is what that is something I cherish so much.
Oh, 100%. My doggy wanted to join us.
Hey, I don't know if you remember me when I came, from the last time I came.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure she does.
I locked my cats downstairs because otherwise they would have been jumping all over everything. I was like, that is not allowed during a live.
Yeah,
I love
no kidding.
cats so much.
If I let my kids in here, they try and take over the stream.
Do we have do we have any other authors we haven't talked about yet that we wanted to? I'm just looking at my lists here.
There's
I had
probably a
authors that I don't like that are Canadian. I don't know if that's the point of this stream.
Let's go.
Well, it is supposed to be a great Canadian author stream, right?
I'm curious, actually. This is just because I know that I'm in the minority. Have either of you read anything by Sebastian de Castell?
I've heard of
No,
Sebastian
I
de
No?
haven't.
Castell, but I
Okay, the
haven't read
Great
anything.
Coats is kind of the adult
Oh, the
series
Great
that
Coats.
he's
Yeah,
done
I've read it.
also.
I've read.
Yeah.
I've read the Great Coats.
Oh,
I read the
okay.
Great Coats.
Okay.
I loved it.
Okay.
I loved it so
You
much.
did
I
love
loved
it?
it so
Okay.
much. Yes.
Yeah.
Because I did not have a good time with that book. And so I'm just always curious because I think I'm like one of like 5 people I've ever met who did not like the Great Coats, the first book.
So
So
I thought so. My thoughts on the book was, I thought it was I thought it was very simple, right? The writing was very simple, very straightforward, and I didn't mind it at all. I didn't mind it at all. There were some things I feel like could have been better, but I feel like the books progressively get better. Like,
I've heard
by the
that.
time you're like the third, fourth book, you're just speeding through them. I read the first book like in a day and a half, and I could have finished it in a day as well. So it was just like it's like, I feel like it's a very good book for to reset your taste, to reset your what is it when
A
you're in the
palate
reading slump?
cleanser?
Palate cleanser. That's the word I'm looking
Yeah.
for. A palate
Yeah.
cleanser.
Well, I can tell you there's one Canadian author who, I might get around to reading one day, but I'm not really feeling like, boy, I got to read that. Nicholas Ames and I can't even remember the name of his series, but I guess it's based off of 80s, 90s bands.
Oh, is that Kings of the Wild? Is that?
Yes.
He's
That's
Canadian?
Kings of the Wilds. Yes, I got that book. I have that book as
A
well.
lot of people have talked about Kings of the Wild, but it's like, well, that's an interesting concept. Maybe I'll read it one day, but I haven't really felt like, oh, I've got to go and get that.
I've had my eye on it for a while. I didn't realize he was Canadian though. But there is a self-published book that is kind of a riff on the Kings of the Wild. It's almost like a remake, except all of the characters are gender swapped, so they're women, and I think it's called Women of the Weird or something like that. And I have it on my Kindle because it's in Kindle Unlimited. And I was like, oh, that's one that is self-published that I'd want to read. But that whole idea of the washed up band of warriors who don't go, they're not really good at being warriors anymore, but they have to have one last hurrah, go save one last person. That sounds interesting to me.
So I feel like I know, and Drew already got this book, and it's not a Canadian author, but good balance, right? Like for the kind of stuff you like, that idea of being washed up and just going on one more quest, a good, really really good protagonist, and but in a dark setting, you should try Aching God. If you have any questions about it, it's self-pub. It's the one I was telling you earlier about, the one
right.
where traditional publishers wanted to get him, but and they wanted to change some things. I'm glad he didn't go with them, But if you can check out the review on my channel, I put a lot of work into that. So if you wanna like to check that out, but Aching God, it's such a good book. And yeah, like it has everything that some things here and there you said you like in books. So check it out.
Excellent. All right, and just to wrap things up, the last question here by CD: has anyone read Ben Galley? He's buddies with Ames, Stinkies, and Victoria. I have not. How about either of you two?
I've seen those book covers.
Bengali.
I think that's the
Um,
Forever King, if I'm getting that right. Maybe CD can
oh,
correct me. It's like got a white cover with an orange
let's see.
person in the middle. It's a very striking cover. I've seen the cover before. I think it's also self-pub. But yeah, no, I haven't picked that up. I would like to read, like you guys know about SPFBO, right? Like self-published,
Yeah.
what does that stand
Yes.
for? Fantasy book off or whatever it's
Yeah.
called. I
The
can never
Mark
get the
Lawrence's
acronym right.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that Mark Lawrence does, and like there's a lot of books in there that I see, and I'm like, oh, I should read those, but then I have a NetGalley account and I just read new stuff that's already out.
You know what? Maybe I'm gonna add him to some of the books I'll read this month. I don't know how large they are because I'm trying to like just read as many books as possible so we crush every other team in the India Accords. But yeah, like the covers are really really amazing. Like the covers are really really amazing. It's a white cover, and it has like really nice illustrations on them, like really nice calligraphies as well. Like for the way it's written, I love it. I absolutely love it. Looks good.
All right. Well, I think we've heard about a lot of great authors today for sure. Some of which I have heard but not read yet. Some of which I haven't heard, which I've now got on my list of authors to get. Thanks to both of you, because I've learned a little bit about some authors I haven't read yet. So that's awesome. I hope everybody that's been watching has had great opportunity to hear about some good and great Canadian authors and getting ideas of some more books to pick up, because it's Canada Day, and my wife said I had to wear the Team Canada jersey today because it's
Of
Canada Day.
course,
So,
of course.
of course, yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of wrap things up. I just want to say thank you to everybody who has watched live. Thanks to everybody who is watching on the replay. And also make sure that you hit up those links down in the description. I've got both Discords for everybody linked down there. Their channels are linked down there. Make sure that you subscribe to Brighton Bookish or Epic Tales if you haven't already. Join the Discords for all of us if you haven't already. We can have some great conversations and chats there. So, just to sign off here, any last thoughts? Sarah, any last thoughts?
I just want to
My
say
last.
oh, go ahead, Epic.
No, go right. No, go right ahead.
I was just
I've
gonna
just
say
been.
thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This was fun. It was great.
Thank you
Absolutely.
so
Thank
much
you for
for.
joining us. And Epic.
Thank you so much for inviting me as well, and I really had a good time. CD287. If you do reach Fletcher or Baker, I don't know if you're on Drew's Discord. I am as well, so just tag me and let me know what you think about it. I like to have a discussion with you about it if you're open to that. If you when you read the books, just hit me up, and yeah, stay epic.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for watching. And as I always like to say, like I like to say in all my videos, until next time, keep on reading. Thanks for joining us. Have a great Canada Day, everyone. Bye.
Bye.